How to Train Your Dragon. Next to Shrek, this is one of DreamWorks' biggest franchises, as well as one of the most beloved franchises of all. But before we talk about the films, let's go back to where it all began. Back in 2001, Cressida Cowell wrote a children's book called Hiccup, the Viking Who Was Seasick, which was about a young Viking who had to prove to his father, Stoic the Vast, that he can prove to be brave on a boat trip. I know what you're all thinking, how does this connect with what I'm talking about? 2 years later, Cowell released the first of her famous book series, How to Train Your Dragon, which was set in a world where Vikings and dragons coexist. Cowell brought back some of the characters like Hiccup and Stoke from her last book, and added some new ones. The book series lasted from 2003 to 2015, with 12 issues published. A year later, in 2004, DreamWorks bought the rights to the book franchise after the success of Over the Hedge in 2006. Producer Bonnie Arnold was intrigued with the book series and wanted to make a film adaptation. It was going to stay really true to the source material and directed by Peter Hastings, best known for his work on Animaniacs, but after his wife's death, he quit the project, and by staying way too true to the source material, it would have been way too sweet and lighthearted for something for DreamWorks standards. That's when Lilo & Stitch directors Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois came in after leaving Disney in 2007 when they scrapped and reimagined their American Dog project. They made some huge changes to the film, like made Toothless Hiccup's dragon companion larger, added in a Vikings versus Dragons conflict, and added in a new female character. With only 15 months to write the film, the story of the Dragon Tamer begins. How to Train Your Dragon was released in March 21st, 2010 in 3D. The film followed Hiccup, a teenage Viking, son of Chief Stoic, living in an environment where his Viking villagers are always at war with the dragons. One day, he shoots a rare dragon called the Night Fury, but instead of killing it, he befriends it, nickname it Toothless, learn more about the dragons, and using them to fly. The film is very different from DreamWorks' past films, ditching their pop culture and pop songs tropes in favor of a large, grand-scale adventure reminiscent of DreamWorks' past hand-drawn films like Prince of Egypt. Roger Deakins of Coen Brothers fame was a visual consultant for The Lion, giving the film a more realistic look. The film grossed nearly $500 million and received critical acclaim, being DreamWorks' highest-rated film on Rotten Tomatoes at 99%. For its breathtaking visuals and music score by the underrated John Powell. The film even managed to get nominated for 2 Oscars. One for Powell's music score, and like Kung Fu Panda, won 10 Annie Awards. Like with Kung Fu Panda and Monsters vs. Aliens, an animated short called Legend of the Bone-Napper Dragon was released on the DVD release, which sees Hiccup and friends, including Asterix, who was not in the books, and was the character I mentioned early on, joining with Gobber, the dragon train creature, on a quest to fight a mysterious dragon called the Bone-Napper. Like with the Kung Fu Panda shorts, featured 2D hand-drawn animation, which shows DreamWorks 2D animation is not long gone as people may say it is. And a year later, on November 21st, 2011, 2 more animated shorts were released. One was a holiday special, and the other one was basically the SpongeBob Krusty training montage of dragons called The Book of Dragons and Gift of the Night Fury. It brought back many of the voices from the films. A year later, on Onward 2012, Hiccup and Toothless went into the realm of television simply called Dragons. Originally aired on Cartoon Network from 2012 to 2014, it was moved to Netflix in 2014. Set after the events of the first film, Berk has become a place for both dragons and Vikings, with many new characters and dragons and new adventures. It brought back some of the voices from the films like Jay Bartwer, America Ferreira, Christopher Mintz-Piesse, T.J. Miller, and David Tennant. While others like Gerard Butler, Craig Ferguson, Jonah Hill, and Kristen Wiig were all replaced, with Nolan North, Chris Edgerly, Zach Perlman, etc. The film was released to critical praise and won tons of awards, and in 2018. Also in the same year was a live arena called How to Train Your Dragon Live Spectacular. It was an adaptation of the first film and featured dragon animatronics created by Global Creatures, best known for Walking with Dinosaurs fame. It was released first in Australia and Melbourne, then in Canada, then finally in the US. Sadly, it was canceled in 2014. But during that same year was something big for the franchise. For in June of 2014, How to Train Your Dragon 2 was released. Set about 5 years after the events of the first film, Berk has become a utopia for both dragons and Vikings. Suddenly, Hiccup reunites with his long-lost mother and has to deal with a new threat called Drago Bloodfist. The sequel was bigger, larger, and even darker than the first film, including the death of Stoic, which is rare to see a major character die in the sequel. But what about Shrek 3? Silence! I know that's rare for an animated sequel is that the characters aged and got redesigns. The film was the first ever to use the Apollo software, taking the immediacy of hand-drawn, the tangibility of stop-motion, and the editing of CGI, giving the film a seamless and otherwise gorgeous look. Upon release, the film was released to critical acclaim and grossed $621.5 million. It also won a Golden Globe, being the first DreamWorks film to do so. Another short was released on the film's DVD called Dawn of the Dragon Riders, taking place about 3 years before the events of the sequel. In between the events of Defenders of Berk and Race to the Edge, a hunt for a lost sheep turned into a competition between Hiccup and his friends for the first title of Dragon Racing Champion of Boik. 5 years later, the third and final film in the franchise, called The Hidden World, was released in February 2019. The film sees Hiccup as the new chief of Berk after his father's death, and they find a new dragon called the Night Fury, which Toothless has the hots for, but a new threat called Grima the Grizzly, who was responsible for the near extinction of the Night Furies, wants Toothless, so now Hiccup has to make a big sacrifice. The film was the first film to use the Primo software, giving the lighting a more realistic look. It also featured one of the saddest and satisfying endings in any animated film franchise, and like before, was released to critical praise and grossed $525.7 million and was nominated for an Oscar. At the end of the year, an epilogue short was released called Homecoming, which aired on NBC. It was featured Hiccup and Astrid, now married and have kids, but their kids want to hunt dragons. Also during the same year was a Netflix series called Dragons Rescue Riders. However, other than the dragons, this has very little to do with the franchise, and all the dragons talk for some reason. Another series was released, this time on Hulu, in 2021 called Dragons: The Nine Realms, which is set hundreds of years after the events of the third film. So with 3 successful movies, all getting Oscar nominations, 3 TV shows, many shorts, video games, comics, and some live stages and rides, the Dragon franchise has become another one of DreamWorks' biggest and most beloved franchise. So for the next video, let's talk about another of their biggest franchises,